I was a co-producer, yeah. And so I initiated the project, then went and brought, which I'll talk about in this, so I brought on two other producers, with the interest of just getting the thing financed and financed well, yeah. So, I mean, I'll probably cover most of this. So, I mean, I think probably what we've all got in common is that we've come to this from a really higgledy-piggledy kind of background, and mine was, I actually did a degree in business at RMIT in Melbourne. After having spent a year in Panama when I finished high school, I decided I grew up in Canberra. I wanted to shock myself and go and live somewhere different and learn another language and that kind of thing. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I just did a business degree, and then spent all of my time, literally the minute uni finished, I'd have saved money working 3 jobs, and I'd just go off travelling and did a bit of photojournalism. Someone else is doing, yes, similar things, and took photos and sold little stories to, you know, and sort of did all of that. And then through a very weird set of circumstances, ended up working in the corporate world, trading commodities for a couple of years. And while I was doing that, that was in Adelaide, the race around the world first season had happened, and I hadn't seen it. I think I'd been overseas, but a friend of mine had copied them all on VHS. And that was while the second one was going to air. So I watched every single episode of every single one, and then watched the second series and went, that's what I want to do. That suddenly I can feel that, you know, it's a combination of, you know, my interests and skills, and not that I had any skills at that point. And so it was around that time I did an after short course pitching thing and won a pass to the Australian Documentary Conference. And around that time I heard about David Bradbury's Cuba film. And because I spoke Spanish, I took 2 weeks off work and came up here and translated, you know, however many hundreds of hours of rushes for him for 2 weeks, which is a really great learning experience, because watching somebody else's rushes is a really great insight into somebody's process. And I had a lot of respect for him, having seen the Chile film and the Nicaragua film and that kind of thing. So and then I volunteered for anyone and everyone and just sort of tried to sort of, I guess, network and try and understand how this whole thing worked. And around the time, in fact, that I was at that documentary conference, they announced the final series of Race, which was Race Around Oz. And I also applied to VCA, and I got accepted, but then at the same time I got into Race. So I ended up choosing to do Race instead, because I figured, you know, why not be humiliated on national television? And that is the best way to learn, is to make your mistakes early and make them often. And that's what we learn. I think they talk about that in that Pixar book. And it's so true. And I had wonderful teachers like Tony Jones came and taught us the art of interview, and different cinematographers. And of course we had to do everything, the sound, presenting, which I'm completely shithouse at. I remember the producers saying, Jen, it sounds like you're asleep in a cupboard, you know, can you have a little bit more enthusiasm? I'm like, that's because I am asleep and in a cupboard, you know, trying to get some quiet sound. But I was really bad at that, and that wasn't, I mean, look, I absolutely loved the experience, and I feel, I've done some teaching at the film school, and I feel, I've come to feel so grateful for that experience, because, you know, it's just learning by doing and having a safety net of sorts. And the young up-and-comers don't have that anymore. It is definitely harder. So I volunteered for IF magazine and ended up working there. I don't know if you guys know Inside Film magazine, and ended up running the IF Awards and becoming the publisher and managing director of IF, and I was there for 6 years. But all around that time, I tried to keep my toe in the water, and I lived in this great apartment block in Tamarama with all these crazy New Zealanders who were filming adventure races, and so then I started doing that with them in my spare time and Christmas holidays, and one of them said, you know, oh, come trekking, I've got to shoot an Everest expedition. He'd climbed Everest 6 times at that point or something and had no toes, and I went to Nepal and kind of fell in love with the place, and then from there kind of got decided to make a little Dateline story for SBS and realised that my body worked really well at altitude, and so just started getting offered those gigs. And so instead of getting paid more at IF, I negotiated just no pay rise, basically. I think I still qualified for the dole for the first 2 years of working there. And I would take more time off to go and spend 2 months climbing a mountain in Tibet somewhere to shoot for Discovery Channel, and they were all with that same team of Sherpas. So Purvatashi I'd met, a decade earlier, and Russell Bryce I'd known for a very long time, and so then I would go off and volunteer for a guiding company in New Zealand to do a technical mountaineering course to upskill in that way, in exchange for shooting and then editing a promo for them, because that kept my shooting skills alive. It also gave me the skills that I needed to work in the mountains, develop all the systems that you need to work at high altitude, which are very different, like how to wear gloves and which gloves to wear and how to carry your camera and all those things. But it also just meant that I kept those editing skills alive, and I'd shoot friends' weddings and edit it because it kept me making stuff while I was doing this other thing. But the great thing about being at IF was that I developed relationships that then have come to pay off many years later with exhibitors and distributors and producers and people that I formed relationships with then, running the IF Awards and all that kind of thing. I kind of have now realised the value of those networks that I created way back then. So I'm working with distributors and different people that I formed relationships with back then in a totally different capacity, but they know who I am, and so it just helped me understand the landscape. But I think it also gave me great connections, even though I'm a documentary filmmaker, into the drama world, and I always sort of chose to work particularly on the more dramatic things that I did with drama cinematographers rather than the doco people. And my producers were always like, well, you can't do that, they'll never do it, it's a documentary. I'm like, well, I can ask, and they would always say yes. And then I worked with a drama editor on a film I made called Solo, and just sort of came to understand that there is value in kind of mixing these things up, because I did want to make, while I do make documentaries, I wanted them to be, like Sherpa, I wanted them to be cinematic and bigger somehow, and to sort of borrow those cinematic devices, which I don't think should belong to drama, but apply them to documentary. So I'm just trying to think where I should go next. I mean, the sound is, honestly, it's a subconscious thing, and you could probably talk a lot about this too. It's Sam Petty, he lives Scott's Head, actually, a bit further south, is, incredibly talented guy and really understands the psychological impact of registers. And Anthony and I were talking about this the other night, like in Animal Kingdom, for example, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was happening, but if you press pause, that you'd realise that there are all these kind of, the sonic nature of, and so, when the sound mix came alive for Sherpa, it really pushed it another 20%, but that was because we had a feature budget on all of those lines. In a documentary you usually get 2 weeks tops to do the sound mix. And the sound design and mixing, and whereas this, it was more like 2 months. And Sam actually trekked all the way to base camp. We sort of did a 50-50 thing, because he wanted to do it off his own bat, because he wanted to come and A, have the experience, because he'd been hearing about it from me for so many years, and B, to collect sounds, and the sounds of the ice. He was completely obsessed by the sounds of ice, and he'd be wandering around there, and they'd always have to send Sherpas off to collect him because he was just always getting lost. And but and it really added to the value of the thing. What I thought I'd sort of do today is, or for this little session, and please just let's make it a conversation, because it's got to be relevant to you. But I thought I'd take you through, in some ways, just a little bit of an anatomy of this film in terms of how it got financed and pitched and all those things, because there's lessons in a lot of that. Because I've made a lot of mistakes, particularly with all of that ownership stuff in my career, and being taken for a ride by various producers, but I also don't regret any of it. You know, I think the opportunities that I've had have meant that, you know, I mean, I was given chances early on, and that then meant that I could kind of do stuff and get skills, and I'm now in a position where I don't have to take my projects to producers. I can get financed by myself, probably not with features, but in documentary. So I think I've probably given you my background to my relationship with the Sherpas, and, you know, I just sort of, it was on and off over 10 years that I traipsed around in that part of the world and developed these relationships, and kind of always had the idea at the back of my mind, but I think it was an idea that wasn't ready to be told. You know, when I did the Dateline piece, it was what it was. It was pretty, I'd encourage you not to Google it, actually. But it you know, it's because it was at a time where the Sherpas would not say anything bad about, and so I very much had to editorialise, whereas I had just been watching the change in dynamic from afar, and that was the Sherpas' presence on Facebook, and that they were commenting on the Dateline piece and saying, where are we, you know, in these Discovery Channel things, like, I saved that guy, and then that's not even in the film. And I could just tell that they were starting to get the shits with all of that, and in fact, you know, so it was when Russell Bryce cancelled that 2012 expedition that I thought, I literally kind of sat up in bed and thought, now is the time to make that film, because he and I had talked about it before over a number of years, and he's very sympathetic to the Sherpas, and he actually loves the Sherpas, you know, while they're behaving themselves. When they misbehave, in his frame, in his terms, you know, that's where he gets the shits. But and I really learnt that about him on this expedition, on his terms. He's very happy to support the Sherpas. So I kind of, you know, I started developing it on my own to start with, and then I thought, you know, if this thing's ever going to happen, it's going to have to be big. It's expensive to go to Everest. It's expensive to shoot on Everest. I know I need a big team. Having worked there before, you can't just have one cinematographer, because invariably one person will go down. They always do, and they did on this trip, because not all bodies work the same at altitude. And so I approached John Smithson first, who I'd done a bit of interviewing for on some of his other series, and he'd also really loved Solo, this other film that I'd made. And that was, for me, I think the reason I got this up was because the two producers that I attached to it had seen that film and believed enough in me that I could make that film plus the sort of background.
And how have they seen that film? Did you send it to them?
No, it was on. John had seen it because it had won quite a lot of awards, and it's in his space. He's kind of in that adventure world space. He mainly does TV, and Bridget Ikin had just seen it on TV.